Hey there, welcome to the Bible in 5. This week you're going to be reading what are called the Pastoral letters, or in your Bibles they're just the letters of 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. These are Paul, the Apostle's final letters. They were written during the period of his life after the book of Acts ends. So the book of Acts ends with Paul under house arrest in Rome, and according to what we can put together from the letters and from other early church history, Paul was released from that imprisonment and had about 5 or 6 more years where he traveled around to the different churches like he had been doing in the book of Acts. And then he got arrested by the Roman authorities again, was put in prison, and then executed. And so these letters come from that period, that final period of his life again. And essentially what these letters are, they're called the pastoral letters because they are written to two close co-workers and friends of Paul. Timothy, who's mentioned in the book of Acts, a co-worker of Paul's, and then also Titus, who's mentioned in the book of Acts and in some of his letters as well. And here's essentially what happens. During these latter years of Paul's life, he's hearing reports about how all of the young Jesus communities are doing across, the ancient Greek and Roman world that he had helped start. And he's hearing reports about problems that are coming up. So, for example, in the church of Ephesus, where Timothy is now a pastor, he's getting reports about false teachers, or teachers who had arisen in the community, but they were not teaching the true version of the gospel. And not only that, but their lives were immoral. They were becoming morally compromised, and they were leading certain people in the community, especially women in the community of Ephesus, astray. And also in Titus, there were just a lot of problems as well. So what Paul does is, instead of writing a letter to the whole church, he takes a different tack. He writes a letter to the leaders, Timothy and to Titus. And what these represent essentially is kind of like Paul's wisdom and reflection and kind of divinely inspired guidance to these two young leaders of these Jesus communities, these churches. So they're often called the pastoral letters because it's sort of like, here's how we're watching Paul handle these challenges and give guidance to these young leaders. And there's really just kind of a core set of themes here. You can read more in the weekly Bible guide that you can also download on the website. But there's just a core set of themes that he returns to. A big focus of his in these letters is the gospel, obviously, the story of the gospel. And he received the story of the gospel from Jesus when he had his encounter. It's told in the book of Acts. And for Paul, that was the utmost thing to protect and guard and preserve from distortions and so on. And a big part of what was happening in the churches where these guys were pastors was people were either misunderstanding the gospel or they were promoting a distorted version of the gospel. It got distorted by religious traditions, or it turned it into a story of how we need to earn our way to God or engage in certain religious practices that will earn God's favor and so on. So time and time again, Paul returns in these letters. He helps them preserve the true story of the gospel, of God's justice and his grace through the death and resurrection of Jesus. Another part of a theme that's kind of coincides with this one is when people are having a real encounter with the true gospel, it will change their lives. And so a big part of what he goes at is there are lots of people in these church communities who say they're believers or say they're Christians or who say they're teaching the gospel, but their lives say otherwise. Their lives show moral compromise. They're not people of integrity. They aren't being changed by the gospel. And so a big part of a theme of what Paul writes here is he encourages Timothy and Titus to not just focus on what people believe, but to really challenge how people live. Because if you believe the gospel, the result will be life change. That's just the way it goes. The gospel is challenging and rescuing us at the same time. And so a big thing that he highlights for these pastors is to focus on the gospel should result in life change. The last piece that Paul focuses on is he encourages Timothy and Titus to develop leaders. In other words, a community of Jesus shouldn't be a place where there's just like one person in charge. A big theme that he says here is you need to be developing new leaders. And so in both Timothy and Titus, he talks about qualifications for men and for women for being leaders. And that's all has to do with character, with humility, with their ability to be shepherds or to teach in the church or whatever. because it's in the developing of new leaders that the Jesus community is going to grow and spread and so on. So that's the pastoral letters. They're short, they're very powerful, they're full of really profound statements of the gospel, but also of real challenges that the gospel should result in genuine life change in our midst here as a community of Jesus. So anyhow, they're very powerful, they're worth reading and rereading and meditating on over many, many years. And I hope it's a good, challenging read for you. We'll see you next time.